Hello and welcome to the Shared Practices podcast. Before we jump into this interview today, I want to apologize for some of the things that we get into on this episode, particularly on my end. I am going to share with you in this episode email management stuff that I got deep into during COVID because that was a pain point for me. We also get into some much bigger picture uh, using stress as data for change and for growth and leadership. So if you're not interested in the email management, there's some really good stuff that comes out on the back end of it. So stick around for that. And this is with Murray Lowe, my dad again. I love and I'm so grateful that I have him as a co-host on this season. And I think you'll really enjoy his perspective. So here we go on another episode of the Shared Practices podcast with Murray Lowe. Hello and welcome to the Shared Practices podcast. We have with us again Murray Lowe. Welcome back to the show.
Great to be back, Rich, and always love to talk about who we are, what we do, and how to get better. That's what I've been thinking about and doing for over 30 years. So happy and honored to be here again.
Well, we just aired the episode with Dr. Jack, so that one was a recent one that just came out. So people are going to have the 360 review fresh on their mind, and this was. I just reflected today. I gave a presentation today to 40, 50 people via my full-time job for the Army on email management, which is a really unsexy, dumb thing to give a presentation on. But something that you asked me, I was really stressed. I mean, I'm always really stressed because I overcommit and all of that. But this was probably 6, 9 months ago. I can't remember the last time I was actually in Utah, but I think
Yeah.
it was at your place, and I was kinda asking for help on, like, getting things done, which is this book and this system that you've gotten training on, and you've, met David Allen and worked with a training framework around that, and so I do you remember the question that you asked me when I was kinda asking for help with all of this?
Yeah, I think it was a very simple question, a pretty direct question. I just said, what's one thing you could change right now in your life that would make life better for you?
And
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 what's that one thing that kind of sucks up most of your time and energy? And I call these energy vampires, like they suck the life out of you. So what's one thing you need to work on that seems to be taking up far more energy than it's worth or deserving?
and pretty quickly and surprisingly to myself, I said email. Between podcast email, personal email, army email, I was getting, 100 plus emails a day, and in my day job, I a lot of those emails require action, so it's not just stuff I can ignore. And stuff was getting lost and dropped and falling through, and to the point where I just felt in this kind of constant state of overwhelm. I think a lot of times that can happen in both a knowledge worker type job, but dentistry, I was thinking about this too recently. Dentistry, I've been listening to David Allen from Getting Things Done, and he talks about widget cranking versus like thinking about what needs to be done. So knowledge work, which requires multiple steps and decision making versus just getting in there and doing something. So that's the widget cranking. And one of the goals of getting things done is that you batch the thinking and the processing and the clarifying about your projects and your commitments so that when it's time to sit down and do stuff, you've already done the hard thinking and you've got this very easy list of like, okay, here are the very clear next actions that I need to crank through. Dentistry has this weird combination where most of the time as a dentist, if you are just clinical, you can almost exist in this, I don't want to call it zen-like state, but it's not task and project management. You walk in the room, you do the dentistry, you see the patient, you leave the room, you do the note, you rinse and you repeat. That is the extent of your project management. Um, it's not these ambiguous things. It's served up to you where this is your job, this is how you do it, and there are challenges and stressors and complications within those appointments and within interpersonal stuff. But the dentistry in and of itself, you can't procrastinate dentistry. Um,
Yep.
it's just there. Which for me is a really good fit because I am great at procrastinating and stressing about stuff. And but then if you take that and you add on the practice ownership side, where now you have lots of projects that are on your plate that sometimes you don't even know what needs to be done, but you know something needs to happen because there's a problem here. Um, Now the majority of your time and attention is in the chair with the patients leading your team, and then on the side you're left with the emails and the projects and these other tasks that are it's very easy to let those things drop off. So I think this conversation is very relevant, especially for a practice owner, maybe for a dentist who is not a practice owner. That's one of the joys of not being a practice owner is that you get to show up, do the dentistry, be done, go home, and really not carry that home with you and bring that stress kind of with you all the time. But it's just interesting to realize to me that being a practice owner means you are taking on the distress of these extra projects, decision making, and execution, and your ability to communicate and execute, manage your email, manage your projects, all of that will either amplify your ability to handle all of this or add to your stress levels on top of everything else that's going on.
Oh, and that's for sure. And in fact, you know, what you want to do as a dentist, or no matter who you are and what you're doing, you want to be present in whatever you're doing and engaged in it, and be focused on that, and do it in a way that brings you joy and doesn't feel like work. It feels like you're in the flow and in the zone, which I think is what a lot of dentists who like to just practice do. And I hope they do that. But I can also tell you that I'm sure there are some dentists who aren't in the zone, who just have to practice, right? So
Sure.
who are preoccupied, or they're bored or whatever. But let's, speaking of managing the practice, then adding that on, you could be fixing someone's teeth while you're thinking about the fact that your receptionist and your hygienist don't get along, and you're wondering about accounts receivable and this and that. And all of a sudden, you're trying to multitask, and neurologically your brain doesn't allow you to do that. And so
Right.
you're going to end up making mistakes. B, you can actually end up not being present in either one. While you're doing your dentistry, you're thinking of other things, and then when you go deal with those other things, your mind goes back to, well, I should have done this better on this patient, and I've got all these other patients. So part of understanding and working on getting things done and emails and these types of things is learning how to be present and relaxed, and making these things sustainable and enjoyable.
Mm.
You will do in your life whatever you find to be sustainable and enjoyable. And your body will send you messages when those things aren't happening. And so we get all kinds of signs that tell us when we're a little bit out of balance. And for you, you are worried. Any time you find yourself worried, and I had to learn this. I didn't learn this until I was in my 40s, but I realized that not once in my life has worry ever made things better.
Mm.
All's worry did was made me be less present, and stew and fret over things that I wasn't focusing in on at the time. So being able to manage your emotional state, your presence, your ability to deal with all these things is critical to the long-term sustainability and the satisfaction and the quality of lifestyle you have. Because if you're not present while you're practicing, you'll end up going home being exhausted, and then take it out on a significant other or family
Sure.
members. So again, there's always a piper that needs to be paid, and so paying attention to these things really does matter.
Well, and that you drove that home to me when you asked that question. What's the one thing that's stressing you out the most that if you could change, you would? And realizing that that stress around email was a piece of data that I could use to say, okay, this isn't working. This is broken. There's something going on here. How can I make this better? And so then stress all of a sudden, we're only stressed about things that we care about. So if I didn't care about my email because I didn't care about the people who were sending me emails, it'd be really easy to just be like, man, whatever. Um, but stress is a data point both for things that we care about and are committed to, and that's why we're stressed about them. but then also how can we improve? And there's some sort of roadblock here. And rather than continuing to stress, let's step back and look at this from a different angle. And so for me, I committed. I said during COVID, this is March timeframe is when I said I really want to come out of COVID back into getting things done. This book, this system that I first read 10 years ago. I've been off and on with it many times. Every single time I implement the system to its fullness of truly capturing everything that comes in, processing, clarifying, having a weekly review, I get so much stuff done, but it is a habit that requires effort to sustain and requires some work and some troubleshooting because you can get hung up on different parts of the system. But I said I want to re-engage with getting things done. I also want to become an email ninja. Like I really want email to be just like not a problem anymore. And I'm still working on the first piece on the getting things done. I'm way better at getting things done. I've been, binge listening to several different podcasts on the topic. I've done some deep internet searching and finding different resources and stuff to help me there. But the email, I feel like I've made tons of improvement to the point now where between my 3 inboxes, my personal, my podcast one, and then my army inbox, all 3 of those will be at inbox 0 every single day. And that's not, a hard thing anymore, whereas before that was stressful. And, and I feel bad for my audience, but I'm really gonna share some of, like, this emails stuff that's been really helpful for me. This is if some people might have realized, like, I thought this was gonna be a really good episode about, like, stresses, data, and all this. Sorry, you're gonna get a little dose of email efficiency here, and then we'll get to some other topics. But I don't know, ha has this ever been a problem for you, or am I alone in this?
Oh no, it's been a problem for me many times, and you introduced me to getting things done probably 2009, I would bet.
Yeah.
11 years ago, and at the time, I read the book. I got an app on my phone, and I tried to implement getting things done, and it helped a little bit, but I really, really didn't do it. Because what tends to happen is when things get overwhelming, we either get stressed or we disengage. And so I think most people actually give up on things like this. I worked with
Mm.
a guy in our company who had an email inbox of 5,000 emails, and you talk to him about getting his inbox down to 0 every day, and he'd look at you like you were nuts, like because he just thrown up his hands and given up. And so sometimes, one of the ways we try and get rid of stress is to disengage, but that's always, again, you end up paying the piper when you disengage. Sooner or later, you either come up with a system to handle the email or you pay someone to handle it for you. And that's acceptable too. One of the things
Oh,
I did when I was a business owner is I had a personal assistant. She was
yeah.
based in India. She would check my emails every day, and she would say, okay, I put these in these places. Here are the 10 that you need to respond to. So there are personal
Mm.
strategies, but there are other, and because this was an overseas person, this actually was an effective way. But what you do need a way to keep up on these things, because if you don't, you end up paying sooner or later, right?
Absolutely.
And by the way, I only get my inbox down to 0 once a week, because that's the true getting things done system. So I am a little bit curious on how you get your. I guess my question would be, why do you have to get your inbox to 0 every day? What value does that add? Because I'm not totally bought into that. I have to say I'm a little skeptical, because you can go, you can become a fanatic about anything. And I had a professor in college who said, any virtue taken to excess becomes a vice. And if you think about that, I can give you example after example of that. And dentists, for example, if you're great at getting things done and making things happen and executing, if you're really good at that, pretty soon you're going to micromanage everyone. If you're really good at working with patients and talking with people, pretty soon you're going to spend all your time talking to people and no work's going to get done. So I'm curious, not only
Yeah.
what you're doing, but why you're doing it, and I also it'll also be interesting to see whether a year or two from now whether you still find that value, or maybe you can dial back to once a week. But tell me, I'll ask you, what are you doing?
So, there's two things that are fundamental. There's two sections of this, and I literally just gave a presentation on all of this. So the first is rules and filters. So I got really aggressive um, about two things. So let me take one step back. There is a presentation by a guy named Merlin Mann. Mann has two N's, and for some reason, because his name was Merlin, I assumed he was super old, but not a super old dude. I don't know why. Obviously.
Okay.
Um, so he gave a talk at Google in 2007. And there's a YouTube video of this. It's about an hour long. Most people don't want to watch an hour long video about email, but he is kind of the guy that took getting things done and David Allen and came up with this concept of inbox zero relating to email. He kind of coined the term in the vernacular. He was a productivity blogger in the early 2000s. Um, I listened to that talk and a lot of things really struck home with me. So that was one of the key. If someone really wants to get a hang of this, I would definitely recommend going and watching Merlin Mann's Inbox Zero Google Talk. So some things
What
that
struck home? Yeah, what were the things that struck home?
so in that talk specifically, he talks about you should only ever touch email in your inbox once. So this is not a place where your email lives. Um, and you shouldn't be like flagging things and leaving stuff in there and kind of triaging and just putting out fires. You need to look at it and come up with there's 5 things, and I'm pulling up a Google image here, so I apologize for the podcasting. There's 5 actions that can occur based on an email. You can delete it, which now with Gmail and all the email services, you don't ever have to delete anything. You just archive it. So you need to know if you know nothing else but the shortcut for how to archive something in your inbox with your keyboard, that is bare minimum. And that should be for most things, you see it and you archive it real quick. You can delete it or archive, delegate it, respond, defer, or do. Those are the 5 fundamental actions. So delete, delegate, respond to it, defer it for later, or just do take an action because of that email. Um, and I have created a corresponding set of folders for these actions. But so there's kind of a methodology, and then there's also just some things that everyone should be doing. So the things that everyone should be doing before we get into the methodology, because I'm excited about this methodology and my application of it, which is shows how big of a nerd I am. Um, the things that everyone should be doing is being very aggressive with your filters. So if you are subscribed to any newsletters, that you first off unsubscribe to everything you can. That's the given. You should be unsubscribing to stuff aggressively. Stuff that you don't want to unsubscribe to, but is kind of like reference material. You want to create folders and filters so that those automatically get put in folders and marked as read so that like later on you can be like, oh, hey, I want to go back and read some of these newsletters from this person that I subscribe to. I care about their stuff, but I don't want it clogging up my inbox every day. So super aggressive with rules, filters, and unsubscribe. And then shortcuts. So Gmail has a whole host of shortcuts to the point now where I don't use my mouse when I'm in my email. So I took the time, I printed off a whole list of them, and every time I would go to do something with my mouse, I would go back to the okay, what's the shortcut for this? So that I can navigate, switch panels, compose, send to all, reply all. All of those shortcuts I now know.
So you're
Um,
doing the voice commands or keyboard commands? What do you mean?
keyboard commands. So
Okay.
I also don't. Um, I prefer not to process email on a phone. It just takes a little bit longer, it's more steps, it's more clunky. On a keyboard, on a desktop, I can do this so much quicker. So learning those shortcuts, is worth it. So rules, filters, shortcuts, those are kind of things that I think even if you don't subscribe to this methodology that I'm gonna tell you about now, um, anyone and everyone should be doing those things and will free up a lot of time automatically there.
And are there just as good as shortcuts in Outlook and Microsoft as Google?
I think so. I think there are a ton of shortcuts there. I really like how Google does theirs, and I have a Gmail bias, and I use Outlook for my day stuff, and I've got 2 Gmail accounts, for my other stuff. But yeah, there are definitely a corresponding set of shortcuts for other email programs.
Okay.
Um, and then there's another program that goes along with shortcuts called Text Expander. It's a program that you can have on your computer, on your mobile devices, on your tablets, and you can create these little snippets that when you type a certain combination, like for me, if I type in SPSIG, so SPSIG, it will auto expand to my full signature for shared practices. So you can create even like a full email template that if you just type like ZZJ, it will type up a whole response. If there's something that you're consistently a type of email that you're consistently sending, hey, thanks for this. I don't have time. I'm going to get to this later, or I'm not interested. Whatever it needs to be, you can create a text expander snippet that will expand that based on a few keystrokes. So that's another thing if you really want to go down the rabbit hole of that. So those are all kind of tools, but not a methodology. The methodology that I have taken both Merlin Man and Getting Things Done and created my own little email folder system is I have 4 folders. I have action, which is where I put anything that is a single action. So I either a reply or something I need to do that's very straightforward and simple to complete. That goes in this action folder. The next folder is project, which is anytime there's like a multi-step project because of this email. So this email is either part of a bigger project that I'm doing or working on right now, and so it's reference material for that bigger project, or this is not just a longer response, or a longer action. It's a multi-step thing. So action and project. So anytime I get an email, I follow the less than 2-minute rule. If I can respond to it in less than 2 minutes and knock it out, I do it, and then it's done. If it needs to be archived, I archived it. If it's gonna require an action that takes longer than 2 minutes, I put it in the action folder. If it's gonna be a multi-step project, it goes in the project folder. The last 2 folders are waiting for and deferred. So waiting for is, something I've sent to someone else and now it's on their plate. Nothing I can do about it. Or something I need to follow up on in a week or 2 to make sure that it gets done. And then deferred is this, I'm going to probably do something about this in the future, but I don't want to think about it this week. And that's a really powerful folder. And it's the same idea as getting things done someday maybe
Right.
folder, or this idea of this is a good idea, but I don't wanna do it now, and I've gotten a lot more aggressive in both my getting things done system and in my email system of getting projects out of my view that I'm not committed to taking action on this week. And that's been a really powerful concept because for a long time getting things done, I would have this huge project list, and it would feel overwhelming of where to start because there's all these possibilities, and even though I clarify next actions, you're still looking at a big list, whereas now I push everything out of view that I'm not committed to doing this week. So, my workflow is I process email and then
So
I
do you do this once a day, twice a day, do a certain time every day? Do you have now a system even around that, or do you just do whenever it's convenient?
um I now it doesn't take very long for me to process these. So now whenever I get on my computer and I've got a full keyboard and I have a minute to check my email, I'll get on my email and quickly move things into these folders, take care of anything that's less than 2 minutes, and then I can decide really quick based on my current actions and my current projects that are on my inbox and in these folders, do I wanna take any action based on any of these right now, or am I okay to wait on this a day or 2? Um, and it's no longer stressful. This is no longer a source of stress, both the processing of it and the managing of commitments and projects within email. And so that's a really long-winded. I'm sure I've lost the majority of people at this point, but for me, this was revolutionary. Everyone's going to have their own system, but for me, this has now solved the problem I had before of huge inboxes, kind of using my inbox as a to-do list, losing stuff. I mean, I was responding to people, hey, from last August that had reached out to me about like a question about a practice or something via the podcast. And I would respond, I'd say, sorry that it took a global pandemic for me to catch up on my email. Um, did this
Right.
ever, get resolved? What did you end up doing in this scenario? Um, but it feels so good to have a real sense of peace and control, and also a skill set around this thing that used to stress me out is now something I feel great competence in, and it's not even like a thing that I have to work on to maintain. It's just easier for me to do it this way between the shortcuts, between the rules, between the folders. I now have a system. So it's been a fun journey that no one's really excited to listen to me about, but because you guys are listening to my podcast, you get to listen to me ramble about this. So I'm sorry.
Well, well, a couple of things. Number one, if you have a slideshow, a presentation on this, you should make them available to the people listening to this podcast, and
Yeah. Okay.
somehow put it on your website so people can kind of get a little more. And obviously, if we send you an email about this, you'll probably throw it in some email box. But the underlying principle, Rich, that you're using here is that you want to create more capacity and capability for yourself.
Mhm.
In order for your practice and your life, I mean, the purpose of getting things done isn't necessarily to become hyper productive so that you can just be doing things 24/7, 365. The purpose of getting things done is to allow you to have the space to deal with the interruptions of life and for you to prioritize what's important to you in the moment. And becoming more efficient and more effective is going to allow you to give you much more space to do those things that are much more important, and to make sure that these things don't occupy space in your head. If the mind can only biologically, we know from the neuroscience that they can only capture kind of one idea, one thought at a time. And the principle behind getting things done is put all, the memory, your memory is the worst possible keeper of this type of information. So put it in a system where you can access and retrieve it, where it helps and it serves you, as opposed to weighing you and then nagging you down. But the overall purpose of getting things done is to make you more effective, to increase your capacity and capability. The faster you can do email, the more time it frees you up to exercise, to meditate, to spend time with your family, or to work on your practice. And I assume you and your listeners ought to be finding all types of things. In fact, I would suggest you ask your listeners, what are the types of things you do that make you more, that increase your capacity and capability, that make you more efficient, more effective, and allow and give you more time so that you can spend time on the things that are most important to you. So I think
Yeah.
maybe it may not be the sexiest thing you talk about in terms of practice, but in terms of longevity, in terms of your life, if you don't do these things, then you end up getting sick, you end up getting burned out, you end up becoming disengaged, and you end up getting divorced. Right? There are all kinds of consequences. You either deal with these things intentionally, or they end up beating you up in one way, shape, or form, and they come back to haunt you.
Well, and I love what you were saying about, increasing your capacity allows you to do the things that you care about more. There's another way that David Allen has put it that I kind of didn't believe him at first. So he said that getting things done is is building a system that you trust enough so that you feel really good about the things that you're not doing. All of the things that you're not doing,
Yep.
you feel great that you're not doing those things because you trust that if they're important, you're going to get to them eventually, and you've got them in a trusted system that you've captured and coordinated and organized. Um, and for a while, I didn't believe that because I was like, "No, this system is actually stressing me out more." When I, would create this big list of projects that I had, I would then feel guilty and stressed about all of those things that I'd committed to or about maintaining this system. And so there is a learning curve of at first, maybe it's more stressful as you're trying to build a new skill set. And then eventually I feel like for me on email, I'm on the back end of this where it's no longer it's no longer a point of pain and stress. And I walked around with a lot of stress and guilt. And every time I'd open up an inbox, it would be a new flash of stress and guilt of the people that I hadn't responded to, the people I was letting down, the people that or the things that I'd forgotten or that were falling through, people reaching out to me. And it had been a few days that I hadn't even like looked at my email because of all of that. So stress and guilt are two things that man, if you've got stuff in your life that you're failing at, that's an awful feeling. Like you feel like you should be doing better. You've got this standard, you know what could be possible. And I think that applies to a lot of practice ownership where there's so much you could be doing. You could be doing better at marketing. You could be doing better at training your team, of setting the culture, of dealing with conflict, of handling the accounting and the AR. Um, but taking a step back from that stress and guilt to say, what can be done here? And I don't know for you if there's ever been any times in your life where the stress and the guilt have accumulated to the point where it was either wearing on you or getting unhealthy. But I've been there many times, so I don't know if you've been there.
Well, oh, absolutely. I'll share with you a couple of times. And let me add that it's not just stress and guilt, but it's a little bit of what I call perfectionism. I work with a lot of coaches who coach world class athletes, and there's not a single person I work with who's ever said to me, I've done everything I think I should have done.
Hmm.
Right? It's impossible for anyone in this world to do everything they think they should have done. And so, if you're a perfectionist, you can literally be the best, have the best dental practice in the world. And yet, if you're a perfectionist and you're worried about what's not happening because it's not perfect, and nobody's perfect, no practice is perfect, no relationship is perfect, no, part of it is being able to manage your own expectations around. I can do what I can do, and what I do is good enough. And it goes back to part of it is I am enough. A lot of dentists are very achievement oriented. They come from good families, and some of their parents are very successful people in their own right. And they always feel like they're trying to please somebody else or trying to measure up to some impossible standard that they can't measure up to. And again, uh, for me, the hardest time in my life for me when this occurred was when I was in my 30s, when I was your age.
Yeah.
When I was in my 30s, I was a management consultant. I was working with some of the largest corporations in the world, with some of the most senior executives. So really kind of heady work. I traveled a lot. I would get on an airplane on a Sunday or Monday night, come home Thursday or Friday, and leave you and the rest of the family at home. And I remember I was doing a huge project in Houston, and I got a little bit sideways with my boss around what our approach. And so I ended up going to the managing partner and I remember I was in the Houston Intercontinental Airports, the George Bush Airport, basically reading the riot act and getting really mad at him and saying things to him that I'd never said before to anyone. I mean, I was just really, really mad. And I remember I got on the plane, and it just kept going over. It was like this thing repeated in my head. I couldn't let go of it. So I called a friend of mine who was a professor, a Harvard guy. He had a PhD in business and psychology.
Uh, Great
And
friend to have.
yeah, he was a fun. He's a great guy. Um, I was talking to him, and he said, "Murray, you sound to me like you're depressed." I mean, I was angry. I was upset. I was frustrated. I felt like things were out of control, and I was angry. And he said, "Murray, you sound like you're depressed." And it's like, hmm, I think he's right.
Huh.
In part, I was depressed because everything was out of control, and I couldn't seem to manage things. My personal life and my travel schedule were out of whack, and I had no control over that. And so I was overwhelmed. And instead of recognizing that I was angry, or instead of recognizing I was depressed, I took it out in anger. But I remember at that point in time thinking, okay. I kind of owned it right then and there. Okay, I'm depressed. So
Huh.
I was flying from Houston. I flew through Dallas. So the first segment I was mad. The second segment I was just depressed, and I thought, okay, I'm depressed now. Let's see what happens here. Do I need to quit my job? What should I tell Nadine? What should I tell my wife? Do I tell my little kids? I didn't tell you guys. Um, do I tell people in some of the volunteer responsibilities I have? And how do I manage this? And I ended up not telling anyone at work. Um, or my clients or anyone, but I ended up saying to myself, okay, I'm going to take it easy, and I'm just going to show up to I had mandatory meetings where I was working with the clients. I would just show up to my mandatory meetings, even to the point where, I would fly to Houston, and I would have a meeting at 10 o'clock. I would literally get into the airport at 9:40, and it was only 10 minutes from, and I would show up to the meeting at 10. And then after the meeting, I'd go to my hotel room and just lie there and sit there. And then my next meeting was at 4. So I literally would just show up to the meetings with clients. And no one knew I was depressed except for Nadine. And then at home on weekends, I said, we just need to lower our expectations on what we can do and what I'm capable of making happen. But there have been times in my life I've had depression at work a couple of times. I had a couple of anxiety attacks at work, and those are signs to you that things are right. As it turns out, so I was working for a consulting firm. I went to the consulting firm and said, I'm never going to work on this project team again, work with these people. They're unhealthy and they're toxic. And if you ever make me work with them again, I'm quitting. And it was very interesting because for about 3 months, they put me on some really fun projects. And then they ran into another big project and they didn't have any resources. So they stuck me back on the team with this toxic guy. And I remember going in the Salt Lake airport, going on the jetway and stepping onto the plane. And as I stepped onto the plane, I could feel the heaviness of depression. I could just feel that heaviness that I had felt for about 2 months. I just came back, and the Friday I got home on a Friday, went in on Monday and quit because I knew that wasn't what I needed to do. Now, you own a dental practice. That's different, right? You have an anxiety attack. You have a dental practice, but those are signs that you need to work on yourself, that you need to pay attention to what's happening in your life and find ways to deal and manage with things in ways that are healthy for you and healthy for the people around you. Because when you're either having panic attacks or being depressed, you can kind of fake it. People don't know. And no one knew I was depressed. It was really interesting. I thought for sure at the end of the project, I thought the client was going to come back and say, Murray really sucked. He was a horrible consultant. In fact, they didn't. They actually had a list of, here are the consultants that did really well, and here are the consultants we'll never invite back in our corporation. And I was on the list of the good consultants. But you can't go on that way. If you end up going on that way, then you end up getting chronic diseases. You end up getting diabetes. You end up getting, heart, cardiovascular diseases, other types of diseases, insomnia and things which affect your health long term. So you definitely need to pay attention to the things. You really should ask yourself about every 6 to 12 months. Okay, what's one thing in my life right now that's causing me the most stress, that's really painful, that I really detest, and if that I could fix would make me better? And fortunately, you had a methodology around getting things done. And then you took it to the next level around emails. There is so much stuff in the world today to help people. I don't know that there are problems that dentists face that they can't find a solution to if they're not inquisitive about it, if they're not willing to take a look at things. I mean, we live in a, at the time, when I was depressed, this was before Prozac, I think was even a drug, a medication. What I should have done back then, as I should have got some medication, but it's always pills and skills. If you just go and rely on medication, so a lot of people, they either check out and disengage, you get sick, or you self-medicate. And oftentimes self-medication is alcohol, drugs, sometimes prescriptions, those types of
Netflix.
things. Exactly. Netflix, the internet, surfing, those types of things. But those won't serve you long-term in terms of, you've invested a career in going to dental school and buying a practice and creating, a wonderful business. But if you're not able to deal with that in an effective way, you'll lose all that. It's not worth it to have the most successful dental practice in the world and have a heart attack when you're 40 and be divorced. Be miserable and divorced. So, there's enough, I believe, in the dental world and in owning a dental practice, and enough ways to do things that you can find a way that works for you. And shared practices, you've got this model of, buying a practice with so many chairs and hygienists and that's great, but that may not be for everyone who's listening out there. Right. if that floats your boat, and I understand that, I love business. I'm starting another leadership company. I love starting businesses. I love trying to talk to people and convince them to come to my way of thinking. And I've always, since I was a little kid, I've always loved everything there was to know about business. But you can also, what you love when you're 25 might also change when you're 35 or when you're 45 and when you're 55. And in fact, one of the most interesting books I read was a book about how your wants, needs, desires, feelings, and thoughts change through the decades. And it was a book written in Sweden, I think over 50 years ago. If someone wants to write a new book, and maybe that's a book I should think about, is to talk about what happens in the various decades of your life, and practice ownership. Getting out of dental school and starting a practice. It's one of the. Do you remember I at Christmas a few years ago I gave you a history of my life, and I talked about the 30s, and I called the 30s was the decade of depression. I think being a 30-year-old today in today's world is the most stressful and depressing time that you can ever have, because it's usually when you've got the most debt, and you've got all kinds of increasing obligations, and you haven't accumulated enough you haven't reaped the benefits of all your efforts yet, and so you're putting way more into life than you're getting out of it.
You're
you know
almost digging your hole deeper at this point. It's like, okay, now I've got the student loans and I've got the practice loans, and the end is nowhere near in sight. There is
yeah,
no immediate exit of like, oh, well, I can just burn this all to the ground and walk away, no big deal. It's like, no, I've taken on the family, the house, the car, the practice, the loans, and there's no way out but work. And sometimes that can feel pretty overwhelming.
not only that, but we now have the internet. I mean, just so the world changes so quickly. We have the internet. We have so many things that distract you, and on all this social media stuff, where comparison is a thief of joy. You compare your practice to someone else's practice, and someone else will talk to you, and whenever anyone else talks to you, they're always going to tell you, they're going to give you a bad data set, because they're always going to tell you about the best thing that happened to them, unless they're a really, really, really close friend. Then they might actually confide in you what's really going on. But generally,
Right.
they're going to tell you the best thing that ever happened to them. And you're going to compare your everyday life to the best thing that happened to Sally over there. And you're going to think, oh man, this is horrible. So yeah, you're investing. And fortunately for dentists, you can really start reaping, I think, in really wonderful ways by the time you're in your 40s. And not all professions allow you to do that. But if you make this investment, not just in your practice, but in yourself and your own leadership effectiveness capability, in your relationships with the people you care about, in your health, and in your emotional well-being, and staying present, staying connected, paying attention to the things that are important around health and nutrition, doing things like meditation, doing whatever you need to do. By the time you start making good money, you'll also be in a wonderful, wonderful spot to be able to use that money for good, the good of your family, the good of helping out in charities, going overseas. There's lots of fun things to do, but that typically doesn't happen. It does happen for a few people in their 30s, but for most people, it's more like their 40s. But there's a decade of investment or more that you've got to put in, and if you don't put that in, then you don't reap that kind of reward.
Well, and I think practice ownership doubles that. If you buy a dental practice at the beginning of your 30s, so you get out of dental school, you do a few years working for someone else, you buy a dental practice at the beginning of your 30s. Most of the time, it's a 10-year note, and so you buy the right practice and you do the right things with it and grow it, improve it, and put your heart and soul in it. By the time you're in your 40s, now all of a sudden that big practice note is gone. And so not only do you have this past decade of, good earnings as a dentist, now you own this asset outright, and your profitability is higher, your take home is higher because you're no longer paying on this big note. Um, so I think you're absolutely right in the capacity of dentists to do good or to make huge progress towards financial independence. A lot of the things that open up to people. Um, And I will say, going back to this, using stress, depression, all these other things as data points, sometimes you have to make those hard decisions to walk away from a job, from an opportunity, from a partnership, from lots of things that seemed like a good idea initially, and now that you're into it a few years, even though it feels like you have to start over from the beginning, sometimes you have to walk away, not always. Other times you need to upgrade your own skill set. And then there are other times where you need to do what George, my partner, is best at, which is delegating or building systems around this. Maybe you've put things on your own plate that you're not good at, that aren't what you love and what you enjoy. And so you need to find someone and train someone and build a role and build a system around these things that are stressing you out, because that isn't your core competency. So, it's not always burn everything to the ground, quit, run away. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's something else, whether personal. But no matter what, if you ignore that data and bury it and just say head down, this is what I have to do, it's going to get worse, not better, and you're not happy. Um, and I've had many of those moments. I feel like I've had more of those moments in the last 4 years of my life between residency and the things that I've taken on. Um, uh, just due to sheer volume. Um, and and there are times where that feels suffocating. There are other times where um, there are these breakthrough moments where you develop a new skill set. And I guess with the email thing, part of the trigger of this was in COVID. I took for a week. My commander, my boss in the army, took a week of leave, and I had to field and respond to all of his emails.
And you thought you had a lot with 100 a day, right?
Yeah. Oh, it was out of control. It was nonstop. I went into our dental office rather than working from home because everyone was remote working. And I worked full days by myself in an office coming home after 5 of just email and phone call triage of his day. But it was that elevated week of like, holy cow, this is really difficult for me, that triggered in me both a desire and also the opportunity to elevate my skill set. So sometimes we have to go to these breaking points and have these stressors to either grow in a new direction or realize it's the wrong direction altogether. Um,
Absolutely.
they're
Yes.
just
Yeah.
painful learning experiences.
Well, they are, and part of what so owning a practice and that that decade of practice ownership and paying off that debt is hard work, but there needs to be some joy in the journey. If it's all hard work, and by the way, hard work is intrinsically satisfying. So if you're a hard worker and you love to work hard, and that's who you are, that's great. I wouldn't take that away from anyone, because for many people, being a hard worker is part of the identity and who they are. And at the same time, you've got to find some joy in the journey, and recognize that. You are more than your dental practice. If you don't have hobbies and relationships outside of your dental practice, eventually, sooner or later, that's going to catch up to you. And so it's not a bad idea to start thinking, to say, okay, what are the types of relationships and the types of things that literally take me away from this and bring me the happiness and joy that I need, as well as what can I do to minimize the drudgery, and maximize my capacity, so that I can do those things even while it's tough.
Absolutely. Well, this has taken a direction that I was hoping it would take. I feel like we talked about both some really specific applications of this principle, but then also the broad picture. And hopefully, if people, George has opened up about a lot of the stuff that he's been through recently. We just started another podcast. Makes me uncomfortable to say the name of it in front of you, Dad, but it's Dental Friends with Benefits is the name of our other podcast. Um,
Okay.
that's George and Ashley Hovis have that podcast. There's nothing going on. The benefits are dental. Okay, just to clarify for our audience,
Got it. Okay.
but a very very kind of casual, raw, real podcast that I have to give George a hard time for because originally when we started this podcast, George said, "I will not listen to a podcast if it's not like 95% plus like data." of like applicable, actionable, because he would sit at his computer on iTunes because he didn't have it on his phone. He wouldn't download it on his phone with like a pen and paper. Like he was listening to a podcast, like a lecture from like the best professor. And so when people would shoot the breeze or talk about stuff or joke around, he was always annoyed. And now we've created a whole second show of completely off topic stuff, but the feedback has been immense of people just like the stuff we've been talking about today. I think he said like 6 or 8 people have reached out to him and Ashley and said, I am now working with a therapist because of your guys' show and because of what you guys have talked about and opened up about. So if anyone is kind of somewhere on this continuum of like, man, maybe I need to work on myself, um, go listen to Dental Friends with Benefits to get some really raw accounts of what other people are going through and to realize you're not alone and there are professionals that can help you and getting help, getting therapy can lead to some significant breakthroughs, and your life can be much better on the back end of having worked through some of these things. So,
And let me can I add something to that?
sure,
Because when I was 38, I had an anxiety attack at work. I thought I had my dream job, my dream company. I had stock options. I was told I was going to become a millionaire, and I had an anxiety attack because of a conversation I'd had with a boss and a project that went sideways that had really high visibility. I got called up to our executive offices and had some really interesting interactions. Um, and at age 38, I had some huge breakthroughs in turn. I didn't really become worry free until I was 40 years old.
right.
If you're experiencing depression and anxiety, and by the way, therapists, I would say half of them are great, and the other half just don't help you. And if they don't help you, go find
Move
someone
on,
new, move on. But you remember the therapist we had was a guy named David.
David. I went
Uh,
through
and yeah, you met David. We became friends. He took me up in his airplane. He was a pilot and a therapist. We became really good friends. But I
he
had some
also almost swam in the Olympics, but like Nazi Germany, he was Jewish, and that was like the Olympics that he was supposed to swim
yeah,
in. Was amazing guy with amazing stories, and he taught me meditation. Uh,
right.
he-
Great guy. So
yeah,
all I'm saying is that we there are if you're experiencing depression or anxiety, there are lots of people who can help you, and not only do they help you in the moment, but they can, the point of going to therapy is not just to deal with the crisis of the moment, but it's to change your perspective so you don't repeat these things. And so glad that you mentioned that and would recommend that to anyone who's experiencing these things. It's, when you own your own practice, it's kind of lonely at the top. And one of the things David asked me at the time, I was a minister in our church and I had a congregation of 400 people. And he said, your job is really interesting because you're a minister and you're a healer, and you get to heal all these 400 people. And then he said, where do you go to get healed? It was an interest. It's like, how do you get healed? So I think as a business owner, you guys heal people's mouths, but you also help in other ways. And in a business, when you own a business, you have employees. You're not just managing their time and their physical efforts and their technical expertise. You're managing their hearts and their whole souls, and you can make a big difference in their lives. And if you're spending time helping all of your staff, the question is, where do you go to get healed and whole? And through David, he helped me at a time where, and obviously I was able through a number of means and methods to find ways to do that myself. But that's something we all need to figure out. That's part of the maturation process.
and sometimes it's really dumb, like watching YouTube videos on how to manage your email. But if that's what you need, that's what you got to work on. So
Absolutely, absolutely.
so I'll leave us on that. But hopefully this helps someone in some way. And now I have another project I need to add to my to-do list of convert my PowerPoint presentation into a PDF that people can download on this episode. So I will go do that. But I really appreciate you coming on the show and talking through all this. So thank you for being on.
Well, and just appreciate that you and all your listeners continue to really genuinely care about your lives and what you're doing. And finding meaning in what you're doing is one of those things. Happy to come anytime. Thanks,
Thanks.
Rich.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Okay, so I made a promise in that episode that I would upload a PDF version of this presentation that I gave. That if you're looking to improve your email, so in the description for the show notes of this, there will be a link that will be a ConvertKit link, which is our email management software where we host these files. So if you click on that, put in your email, confirm the email when you get it, you'll be able to download my current guide on how to make email management more effective. And you're going to have to apply that to your own email tool. I'll have the Gmail stuff in there. I'll have my Outlook stuff in there that I currently use for my day job. So I do this in 2 different systems. And hopefully it helps. Hopefully this is a little bit interesting. And if nothing else, everything else that we talked about today, I really enjoyed and have seen benefit and continue to see benefit. And there's none of us are perfect at this. And please go listen to Dental Friends with Benefits with Dr. George Hariri and Dr. Ashley Hovis. It's amazing, hilarious, inappropriate, not cleaned up like Shared Practices is. So it's real, raw, good stuff. So go take a listen. And we will talk with you next time on the Shared Practices podcast.